way, shape, or form doing something related to dogs. And we're all kind of learning at the same time. I was having some conversations with some of the providers in the back here. And what's interesting is that in Seattle, they may do one thing related to an ordinance that helps manage the solution because they started a little earlier than we did in the middle of 2017. But at the same time, it's not like there's this one set of lessons learned that we as a city, being at the cusp of this, can take and say, these are the things that we need to do to make sure that we maintain safety for everyone. So we're all learning at the same time. We're having phone calls, East Coast, West Coast, and we're kind of stuck in the middle. But we're all trying to learn at the same time. So this is going to be an iterative process. That's the reason in the council action you saw a 6-month pivot process, because we want to have the ability to pivot with the industry, not against. But with that, we need to make sure that companies are going to be reactive to managing their own fleets. We need to make sure that we have the city codes in place to protect everyone, and make sure that if these things are placed in places where they shouldn't be, or with businesses that don't want them, there's some way or recourse for that to be rectified. So, as I mentioned earlier, we launched Dockless Systems in February. That started during IEEE Green Week. During that same week, we had 2 companies launch before the pilot. That, in essence, sped up the pilot, right? So now what we have, if you're familiar with when ordinance passed, basically a legal pilot, which we're doing now. Now, I want to explain and show some pictures before I move on of what I mean by that last foot. This is in DC. This is an example of why an ADA person would have an issue with that. Here in San Francisco, again, including its tripping hazards. And these are the kind of things that, as we as a community, if we can just talk about this stuff, right, and then help our collective users, the community and the citizens that are utilizing the bike systems, etc. It's just a matter of training, really, at the end of the day, to make sure that they're putting these devices up in a fashion that is responsible. This one in Dallas, another good example of how these can become tripping hazards. So I mentioned what do the other cities do? Again, we're all in various stages of this, but you can get an idea that everyone's moving towards a permitted system to some degree. It just depends on how you want to go through the mechanics of permitting that system. There's several different ones out there. Now, so who paid attention to Thursday night's ordinance? Thank you, Mr. Pat, I appreciate that. So there were several of us that got to burn the midnight oil all the way to about 2:30 a.m. But what came out of that was an ordinance that authorizes the Office of Transportation Department to start a license and permit system to manage Dockless Mobility solutions in Austin. So the first question that I got asked is it bikes or is it scooters? Well, it's both, and then everything else that's coming after it. So being someone that's in the smart mobility transportation sector, I know that this isn't the end of this game, and so we needed to create something that was extensible and sustainable for us to manage other Dockless mobility solutions as they come to our marketplace. That Dockless ordinance also included bonuses for anything outside of the core downtown. So in other words, if you can serve other underserved areas or low and moderate income areas, then you'll get a bonus for additional devices. We're still working on exactly what the rules about that could be. Again, the permit process is there so that we can enforce for safety, create a permit, and then enforce against any violations of that permit, and then that holds the companies responsible for not only their devices but their use. We're going to require some aggregated anonymized data that strips off PII. Just really simple things like how many trips, how many miles are being done by this, so we can get an idea of exactly how many miles are we taking off of the road, how many miles driven, how many people are we not putting in single occupant vehicles and clogging up the road. We're also going to require insurance and performance bonds. So an insurance for general liability and a performance bond for device in case the company goes belly up and they leave town with all their devices sitting around, and there's a way to use that performance bond to clean that mess up and things back to normal. And then finally, as you heard, council action, customer service and complaint line information. A lot of people want to know what exactly is the PAPC. It is that right there. So it should come on the east, to move back on the west, or towards the MOP. So anything in that area is going to be part of the permit. Anything outside of that area will be considered a bonus. Now, so part of the reason we're doing the pilot is so we can work with the companies to better understand that last foot management. How do we go about making these things safe so they're not falling down? Just real quick, I'll give an example. A couple of weeks ago, I was following around and doing ride-alongs with my enforcement officers who were happening to do these things and pick them up. And, it was a windy day. One of them fell over. We were behind a group of people that was walking. Normal resident just picked it up, threw it against the building wall because it was in their way. Well, they were busy. It wasn't their job to do. So they did it kind of haphazardly, right? It so happens that it didn't rest against the building wall. It wobbled and fell down right in front of the person walking behind them. I think that's a very good example of why all of us that are going to use these services need to make sure that we're being responsible. And a part of that, to help us to be responsible, would be to create sort of a dockless nest to put these things in. So that's what you see in DC and some other areas. They've actually painted boxes on the sidewalk. These are the areas where you're supposed to put these dockless solutions in. Obviously, a lot of these things are GPS enabled. So the geek in me goes, why can't we do geofencing instead? And haptic response on something, and kind of, just that'll help train people, to keep buzzing at you until you put it in the place it belongs. So I think there's lots of opportunities for us to work together with the private sector, essentially to create the level of a management system in place so that everybody can use these the way that we want them to use them. And I want everybody to use them. Trust me, I would prefer to get more cars off the road, especially for these short trips, right? Where we're using 35 and these roads to basically go less than a mile down the highway. We could do a lot better by utilizing different modes. I want to key on something. I got this in an email today. And so NACTO has just finished their national bike share study. And they just launched, they gave everybody in the cities that are part of NACTO basically an advanced copy before it goes out. And so some interesting things that I pulled out of that. So number one, bike share ridership continues to just increase. That's all, I'll call it just all current active transportation share. Because scooter share prices or numbers are starting to get added to this now. Most of the new companies entering the market, it's really grown. So 3 in 2016 of 10 last year. I can tell you just here in Austin we had at least 15. But it's volatile. We've seen some companies launch and then go bankrupt in the same year. So it's definitely an emerging market. More subsystems have to have subsidized low-income passes, so we're starting to see some equity happen, which is great. And then last but not least is the dockless component, which for last year's numbers was very interesting. 44% of all bikes on the ground were dockless, but only 4% of the rides. So I think that's where we need to work with our dockless companies to better understand how we can right-size the number of bikes in a marketplace and help drive ridership. Because at the end of the day, I want more rides than more bikes. We need to act now. You obviously have heard why. Safe access for everyone. And we need to make sure it's sustainable. And at the end of the day, if anyone's concerned, we're not stopping the community engagement process. As we move forward with these emergency rules, we will be engaging the public through this 6-month churn of permitting, so that we always have 6 months where we can come back and tell you how we're doing. So next steps will be we're in the process right now of developing and adopting an emergency rules and permit system. Once that's in place, we'll work with operators to roll that out. with that, I said it before, was the level of community engagement. We'll need to do some geofencing and some boxes in some places for sure, especially around in the tight cores, because there's just so much activity and so little sidewalk. And then we need to monitor for performance, and then report that progress back to council in 6 months. That's it. We'll wait for questions. Thank you.
Can I pull this out? Absolutely. I like to move if I'm having a presentation. So I have prepared a presentation that I'm not going to use, as is my usual process. I want to thank everyone for being here. Dockless Bike Share is an important thing that's happening in cities all over the country. It is new in the U.S. It's still relatively new. We're learning how it works in U.S. cities. This sort of process is really, really important because it's going to be different in the U.S. We want to make sure we get it right. For those of you that haven't heard of OFO, we are the oldest and the largest dockless bike share company in the world. We do about 32 million trips a day. We're in 200 cities around the globe and in 24 and counting in the U.S. That means we have operated in cities of every size, all different weather, topography, types of populations, demographic makeup, and we've succeeded. We know how to do it right. We know how to look at our data, get feedback from the community, and make sure that we're creating a dockless bike share program that serves those neighborhoods. Now, one of the key reasons that Dockless Bike Share has succeeded is because, just for background, for 2 years before I came to OFO, I ran the Beat Cycle program in Houston. So I have some familiarity with a dock-based program. And while that program got a ton of use and was a huge success, it consisted of about 500 bikes that served a narrow portion of the Houston population. And every time we put in a new station, every time we scraped together enough state and federal dollars to put a new station in, usage exploded. It just went through the roof. And while that is a sign that there's a need for dockless or for bike share in general, it also told me that there was this pent-up latent demand that was not going to be met. And because we depended on dollars from the state and from the feds, I don't think Trump has put us in his infrastructure bill yet, but if he returns my tweets, there's a chance. We're just not going to really be able to reach the scale that it requires. And when I say that it's required, if we talk about bike share as a tool of social mobility, as a tool for connecting the community to transit, to amenities, to the doctor's office, to the grocery store, to school, that requires a fundamental shift in our relationship with bike share. You have to know that you can walk out of this Capitol factory and there will be a bike nearby. You need to know that you can leave it near your destination without opening up an app and trying to figure out where that next station is or just having learned where it is. You need to have that level of dependability. And station-based is not going anywhere. I don't want it to go anywhere, but I think this is a good supplement to what we've already seen with successful bike share programs around the country. One of the key little quirks, Everett, our GM from Dallas, is here. Dallas is a huge market for bike share, in part because the city decided not to regulate. So we've learned a lot about how these programs work. We've been able to experiment. If there's a Lady Gaga concert at the American Airlines Center, we've got to send a bunch of guys down to pick up bikes at the end of the day. And so we use our data to adjust our operations and to optimize our performance. But we also recently dug into the data and realized that just shy of 70% of all trips began or ended near a transit stop or a bus stop. And so that, I don't need to spell out for y'all what that means. This is really a tool that cities can use at no cost to the cities to leverage investments they have already made in transit. And one of the best things about Dockless Bike Share, if you're a city, is that it comes at no cost. We're not asking you for money to put these bikes on the ground. We're not asking for money to run the operations. All we are asking for is a favorable regulatory environment so that we can operate, so that we can optimize our system and create a network that's going to serve all of a city, every community. And that is really one of the magic's too strong. That's one of the really exciting things about Dockless Bike Share is, if you're going to put a station in the ground, you need a certain level of density. If you want to put a single bike out in the street, you don't require that anymore. So all of a sudden, you're picking up all these trips and all these consumers who previously weren't being served by bike share. Not because nobody wanted to, not because anybody thought it wasn't a good idea to serve them, but just because that model doesn't serve those populations. And so I hear a lot in meetings with government, with individuals, how many trips is each bike getting? That's the metric I want to hear. That's what I want to know. And the best way to think about why that number is, gives you a start but fails to evaluate the efficacy of a bike share system is because if I live in a neighborhood, an underserved neighborhood, and I need to use the bike 2 or 3 times a day, well, the numbers on that bike are not going to be great. But the value of that bike to that individual who had to get to school, who had to get to their grandmother's house to cook them dinner, who had to go meet a friend is enormous. And so we don't want to get rid of that trip. That's an important trip. And so finally, the other thing that gets lost sometimes in these conversations, we don't want to dump a bunch of bikes on the street and not have them get used. We are a company. We're out to survive. And if those bikes aren't getting used ever, we're going to move them. If a bike is broken, we're going to pick it up and we're going to fix it. Because if no one is riding that bike, we're not making any money. And that sounds crass, but that's the free market. That's how we make sure we're serving all communities effectively. And that's how we make sure that we survive and continue to serve the cities in which we operate. So thank you.
Luke?
Go back to the pulpit. So I'm Luke Pettyjohn. I'm the partnerships lead in the Central U.S. for SPIN, another one of the Dockless Mobility providers. We're all about mobility. We like to be mode agnostic, we like to say. We named ourselves SPIN because we want to be able to provide mobility solutions for this first and last mile or leisure activities, whatever it might be, and we're not going to tie that just to the bicycle. Like the city of Austin, if there's ever a time where some other technology comes out, we want to be able to adapt to that. So if there's dockless personal mobility drones that come out at some point in the future, we want to be all for it because there's going to be rotors that will spin on that. It's interesting going here between OPPO, the billion-dollar juggernaut that did originate dockless bike share in the world, and like Carter said, they're getting 32 million rides per day, which is amazing. And then with Jump coming after, we created this amazing e-bike product and secured a pretty great scoop up by Uber recently. So what does that leave SPIN? Where do we fit in, and what solutions do we provide? As you can see from some of our numbers, which are pretty dated at this point, by the fall we should be in 31, 32 campus markets alone. But as you can see, on just 12,000 bikes, we have over 228,000 riders, unique riders, and that's on the standard bike. So there's likely a limit to that, especially when so many companies are vying for limited space in cities. And like a lot of you have seen, there are other ways to get people around town. That's why we introduced the scooter. A lot of you saw in the past couple of weeks, Bird and Lime had their scooters around. We tried to work a little more closely with the city of Austin to not follow the same approach that Bird and Lime did in getting those scooters out. Similar to both of those, they have a max speed of about 15 miles an hour. They can go up to about 20 miles. So they solve a lot of the problems that people come across when they need to get from that transit stop, or they want to cruise around town, but they're afraid of bikes, or they're lazy, maybe. So, like I said, the scooter solves a lot of the same problems, but it is just a different mode. We like being able to reach people via different options. So in our early pilot that we ran in San Francisco recently, from about March 20th to April 26th is when we collected this data, we had an average of about 60 scooters on the streets, and we saw over 8,700 rides on 60 scooters, with almost 5,000 unique riders and about 4 trips per scooter per day. Like I was mentioning earlier, some people we're seeing a lot more rides per scooter per day than bike, whether that's a novelty and people just like the excitement of the scooter because they haven't ridden one the way they have a bike, or they are afraid of or lazy towards bikes, remains to be seen, but we're here to provide those options for people. So using that data, we ran some use cases based on when people may experience a scooter as a better option. When it came to competing with a commuter train, it was more than 50% faster and cost about $1.90 in this case. When it came to tourists leaving a ball game, it was more than 50% faster than an Uber pool ride, and people probably enjoyed it more too. The food courier example is an interesting one because it solves the same problem that we talk about with reducing these single occupancy vehicles here. If a food courier is trying to deliver food to someone and has to find a place to park, often they're going to be doing it quickly and they may or may not park illegally, which could result also in a ticket. If they just jump on a scooter, they can do it more than 50% faster again and avoid the issue of ticketing. So working all of that, we saw a lot of the same things that Carter mentioned with the scooters. Just in our 1 month pilot, we saw that about 20% of them started and or ended within a half a block of a transit center. I won't run through the app. Most of you guys know how all this stuff works. Tagging along a little bit to what the city of Austin is doing with localized rules and talking about how that's different everywhere. These are some of the things that we provide for the scooters in San Francisco. Anytime someone opens the app, we encourage helmet use, we instruct on how to ride the scooter, we show how it should be ridden in the city, we have parking instructions, riding rules, and a geo-fenced area that says please stay within these boundaries. Again, we don't collect any personally identifiable information except for email or name and email if you sign up through Facebook. We don't share it, we don't sell it unless it's sharing it with the city when it is scrubbed, aggregated, and anonymized. When it comes to exclusive partners, we're happy to provide data, and when it comes to competitive markets, we like to use third parties that can aggregate and anonymize it. Some of that data looks like this. Heat maps. They're particularly important for planning officials in cities because they can determine routes. We can provide routes as well. But start and end locations are huge, especially when it's tying into local transit. They're also great for us when it comes to operations because, as was mentioned earlier, we're fully incentivized to get these things back to the highest demand areas and pick them up from those destination areas. When it comes to scooters, there's an added layer of this because we're picking them up, charging them, and getting them back out in the morning for people to use again. So we want to know where they're ending up and where we need to put them for that use. I'm not going to go through much of the operations, but the last thing I'd like to say is that we do like to do Dockless the right way, no matter what the vehicle is, whether it's bikes, e-bikes, scooters, something in the future that's coming and we're not even aware of yet. We don't replicate the Chinese model here by dumping as many bikes as we can. You saw that we have about 12,000 bikes nationwide. That's about the same amount as a couple of companies have each in Dallas. We really try to focus on providing the service rather than the amount of bikes. The last thing I'd like to say is that we typically oppose state preemption in any state that we see it. Most of you probably remember what happened with Uber and Lyft in the early days, and then they went to the state house, the lobbying happened, and a state preemption bill came in. So it's really interesting to me to see when the most federalist leaning states start to consolidate power at the state level and tell local officials what they can and can't do. A bill like this has already gone through Florida where they basically took away the city's ability to say this is how many bikes you can have and these are the rules. We're going to do it at the state level. It's working its way through Oklahoma right now. Spin really prefers to work with local communities, whether it's campuses or cities, to craft responsible rules for that particular market. And we're really excited to bring the service to Austin. All right, Joanne.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I just got south of Brooklyn, which is where our offices are, and really pumped to be back in Austin. Last time I was here was for the NAPS conference that was 2016. It happened the day that President Trump was elected. So that was interesting. Anyway, Jump Bikes is bike share electrified. We've been doing Dockless bike share that locks to bike racks since 2013. We call them smart bikes. They have active GPS. And we recently introduced our pedal assist model, which is right over there, which is has an electric motor. Ours is front-wheel drive, and it's pretty awesome. And if you want to give it a spin later or a jump, I don't know. Let me know. So how are we different? A lot of ways, in my opinion. First, we really value accessibility and equity. Accessibility and equity can take a lot of forms, but when it comes to the bike, we do it by design. For example, you don't need a smartphone to use our bikes. You can use an RFID card, like is pictured here. That's the Clipper card in San Francisco. You can also just use your account number and manually enter it into the keypad that's on the back of the bike. We also accept cash payments in our system, so people who are unbanked can also use the system. We really value orderly streets. Our bike, unlike the bikes here today, locks to something, notably a bike rack. Like this is the New York City like normal bike rack. It also locks to a street sign. Just pretty standard stuff in our opinion. It keeps bikes where they're meant to be. Oh, sorry, I meant to say, because you have to lock the bike to something, it also increases accountability. So we also know who left that bike where and when. And if you didn't lock it to something and something happens to it, we know who messed up. And we can kind of, anyway, quality and control. We've been doing bike share and optimizing our bikes since 2013. We've been operating these things for a long time. We have 15,000 on the road right now, across 6 different countries. We have a bunch more in the pipeline, thanks Uber. And we're really excited to bring them to more cities. But we also have been working really closely with cities for a long time. We've gone through a number of procurement processes, which were much more stringent than the current permitting frameworks that we've seen. So we've gone through tons of certifications and ISO certifications, that sort of thing. We also have a number of little bells and whistles on the frame that have been designed purposefully to limit vandalism and that sort of thing. Finally, shared data and APIs. Really love working with our city partners and making sure that the trip data that we have is meaningful to them, but also protects our customers. The data that we share is from our active GPS, so we actually get trip routes, not just start and stops, which is really interesting. And we also we're the first company to use the GBFS, which is the General Bike Share Feed Specification. Yeah, I always flip the last two, which is a real-time, basically, marker that allows for comparative data across bike share systems. So every operator in every city that requires GBFS, you can compare bike share data. Right now, 100 cities use it. Austin's one of them, and it really allows for third-party app development to use to sort of compile lots of different bike share systems into one app. Transit app is a really good example of that. And we just really like making sure the data is open and available, but still protects our users. So just for fun, here's a little bit of data from our San Francisco system that launched in mid-January. We have 250 bikes on the ground out there. We've had over 27,000 signups and over 110,000 trips since then. We're pretty pumped about that, frankly. But what's even more exciting for us, really, is that those trips are 2.6 miles on average, which means basically 3 times more than our standard pedal bikes, which means that we really think we might be replacing car trips. and that's really valuable. It means people from like the edge of the city are getting to the downtown core. And if this is the average, then we have people going a lot farther too, and shorter, because that's the nature of averages. If you hadn't heard. Another thing that we're really proud of is in the San Francisco permit, and I don't know if you guys are writing this into yours, but they put, we have to make sure that we include a lot of communities of concern, which are basically just delineated areas that have a certain socioeconomic makeup, and right now 40% of our trips either start and stop in those areas. We also have special pricing programs for people who need certain qualifications for low-income memberships. So we're really proud of that. It's something that's really close to the core of our mission. So we're really pumped. Next. Okay, so what are we doing? This is a slightly old graph. It's about a month and change old. So right now we're actually 10,000 trips per week in San Francisco. And so things are going in the right direction for us. And then this is my last graph, and this is one that we're really excited about for a number of reasons. So first, let me walk you through it. 8 trips per bike per day. This is unheard of in our systems anyway. We're really excited. So average trip is 2.6 miles and 8 trips per bike per day. That's like really taking people out of cars, hopefully. But the other really great thing about this slide, the blue line that you see here is Ford Go Bike, which is the existing dock-based system. And we know Motivate, they're also a Brooklyn-based company, and they run that system in San Francisco. But what's cool here is you can see the jump trips are kind of taking off, but the Ford Go Bike trips aren't being cannibalized at all, right? They're staying the same. So what I'm saying is it's really nice, it really complements what's already going on in that city, and it is really sort of an indicator of how bikes are kind of taking a little bit more mode share. So we're really excited. Thanks so much.
Awesome. We're on to our last speaker. It's going to be Elliot McFadden with B-Cycle, and then we will move promptly into our Q&A with the entire group.
Good evening. Again, my name is Elliot McFadden, and I'm actually going to come to you here from a perspective of somebody who's been in the shared vehicle industry for 12 years. I actually was the founder of Austin Car Share, the first car sharing service in the state of Texas that was predated Car2Go, and founded and helped create Austin B-Cycle with the city and our nonprofit board. I also helped create the National Car Share Association as well as the North American Bike Share Association. So I have a little bit more perspective. I'm not just been hired by a company right off the street. I've been in this industry for a while, and I think that perspective is important. One of my favorite quotes is from General Omar Bradley. He led the Allies to victory, the American troops in against Germany in World War II. And he used to say, amateurs study strategy, professionals study logistics. And it doesn't matter how great our idea is if we don't understand how to effectively implement it and execute. So a little bit about Austin B-Cycle. So, this is coming up wrong, but we'll jump right in. So a couple of things I like to say. Bike share is like a Facebook status. It's complicated. We're actually owned by the city of Austin, so we're your publicly owned bike share system. We're managed by local nonprofit Bike Share of Austin, which I'm the executive director of. Our equipment is provided by a company called B-Cycle. That went through a competitive bidding process to be awarded that. And so there's a little bit of confusion. There are other cities that have B-Cycle. We're all independently operated, and B-Cycle is our equipment vendor. We have direct oversight. So we have a bike share advisory board that's made up of stakeholders within the community that make sure that we are being fair, that we are serving all parts of the community, that we're doing our job. And most importantly, because we're publicly owned, any profits that we make aside from keeping the system operating, goes back into the community. So this system is designed much like Austin Energy. If we reach a point where we are making profits, there are dividends that are paid back to the community. So we've been really successful. We launched with 11 stations in 2013. We're now up to 63. We have 510 bikes. We're going to add 13 more stations this year. We went from about 150,000 trips. We're now projecting this year 650,000 trips in our system. So huge growth there. We've set records. Our first South by Southwest, we beat New York City for the most checkouts per bike in a single day. And if anybody's been to the university area, we have an incredible enrollment there. Over 10,000 students are now enrolled in the B-Cycle system. That part of our system, we are averaging 14 checkouts per bike per day. So great job, Jump. Those are great numbers, but we're doing even better with UT. We have one of the best fare box recovery rates in the nation. So that's a kind of a technical term we use in the industry. That's basically our profitability. So we cover 85 to 100% of our operations with ridership revenue. So this is important because one of the first things I learned in bike share school is there's no money in bike share. And I think when we look at all these new models, we have to keep in mind there are investor dollars being put in. What is the way to profitability? And those are some questions I think we do need to ask. So we all are also community focused because we're local and we're made up of leaders from our community. So we do a public input process. We've done forums, we've done wiki maps. We take feedback from the public where folks want to see stations. We've also, we're one of the first in the country to develop a low-income program. We were the first in the country to do a cash-based prepaid card. So we've been innovating there. And all of our data is transparent. So there's a lot of discussion about transparency. There's not a lot of discussion about how you verify. And because our system is owned by the city has complete access to their data. So we know the data is real. And most importantly, your personal data is safe and it stays here. We have a very simple business model. We get people on bikes and we use the revenue from that to sustain the system. So this isn't about data sharing, this isn't about selling data, it's about keeping it right here. And we are built for the long haul. So we are very careful about growth. I know there's a lot of frustration that we don't grow and serve as many areas as possible. But we're also focused on sustainability, which means we put bike share stations where they work. And we actually do move a few when they don't work. And that's important because we want it to be sustainable. We also have equipment that's built to last. And I think this is an issue that I'd love to see the city kind of get a little more involved in, is standards for the equipment. Because B-Cycle won a competitive bid, they had to show all the countermeasures, just like the jump bike has, to prevent people from tampering it from it. If you can, by hand, adjust the brakes, make them in a way that brakes don't work, that's not a good thing. You need countermeasures for that if it's going to be out in the public. Any weight of person can get on this bike and ride, and they don't have to fear the frame is going to break. These are important things, and we have the Denver system, which is a few years ahead of us, using similar equipment, so we know right now our bikes are going to last 10 years. We're not a low-cost, cheapest possible bike put out on the street. We're not a consumer bike that's been retrofitted. We're built from the ground up for bike share. And our stations are projected to last 20 years. So yes, there was a large upfront public investment, but we're not going to be replacing this equipment anytime soon. And the final thing I'd just say is we try to be smart about our investments and smart about innovation. Not every innovation is going to work. We're definitely looking at all of the options on the street, but we seriously looked at stationless bikes over many years because this technology has been in the pipeline for a while. And I think we have some concerns about the long-term sustainability, the operational cost, and the impact on public space. And so we look to be smart how we run our system and smart how we grow. Thank you.
All right, everybody come back up and grab a chair while you're coming too. All right, so I'm going to hand the mic over to Joanna.
Thanks.
And then we have this. Yeah? All right. I've never used this before. So, who has the first question? Anybody? Here we go. All right.
Is this on?
There we go.
Question for Jason.
Next question is Pastor.
So, blocking the sidewalk isn't new to Austin. Will the compliance officers also have the ability to ticket cars that are blocking the sidewalk?
So specific to the ordinance, it's about dockless personal mobility. So we're trying to not delve into some of the things that you may have seen in the council meeting, like removable vehicles, trash cans, some of the other things that we've seen in the outskirts of the city that are currently violating the current city ordinance. So, no, my officers are going to be specifically policing dockless mobility options that are in the sidewalk. So, if we can, start to get towards an area where there's a lot of stand-up. With the permit, the idea is to help you guys with stand-up techniques and other things like that as well. I got a question. Where can I get one of those? That's really cool.
I think you mentioned about the geofencing. So does it actually work in like downtown for like the bike level?
Yeah, good question. With urban canyoning, obviously GPS signals are a little.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't work like on the phone. They're out in downtown.
Right. So we got to be careful about where we pick and what modalities we use and where. Right. So painted boxes will probably be more around downtown. Outside of the city where you are able to get a good GPS signal. That might be areas where we do geofencing. For instance, no motorized vehicle of any type is allowed on any of the trails in Austin. So related to Austin Parks, it'd be great. We're actually working with Park Department right now to get their GIS file so that we can go ahead and see what that is and create just a geofence around anything that's park, right? So that'd be the first step in creating some areas where we can and can't use these things.
So we have active GPS on our bikes, and what that means is in real time, the bike can communicate to our server, can communicate to our rider if they're inside or outside of the geofence. We've been using geofences since our inception to create service areas, as well as we've always called them hubs when we use proprietary station infrastructure. We would also geofence around it so that if those station locations were full, people could still park within the geofence but at a standard bike rack. So you're right, like with the urban canyoning, that is somewhat of a challenge, but thankfully the technology is increasingly getting better. And we also made our bike really obvious visually.
It's not a very large throwing distance so far. So. I had a question for the city as well. Along with like the usage of the bikes, are there any rules in place as far as data privacy for users of the bikes or scooters or anything like that?
There will be. We are going to be putting in rules related to stripping out PII, for instance, as well as any other kind of traceable information. Really what we want to do is utilize the feeds and what's been done by MACTO already and go at that level. We don't want to really get too granular because then it changes depending on whose bike, solution, and business model and how they currently collect their data. So we're trying to create something that's, at least for this first 6-month process, is at a high enough level that we can maintain privacy, but also be fair to anyone that wants to enter the market for this first bid. That's a big throw.
Yeah, this is for all four vendors. If y'all were in charge, what are the three most important components to any bike share ordinance?
I would say low fees, which allow you to achieve scale. You know, if you don't have enough bikes in a market, you simply do not have a network that allows you to get wherever you want to go and to depend on that system of bikes to get where you need to go. Some of the fees that we're seeing just around the U.S. Are really high, and while they allow us to serve the downtown core, they fundamentally do not allow us to serve broad swaths of the city, and that's a shame. It doesn't have to happen that way, and so that's my
My biggest, I have sort of two big concerns. One is consumer protection, and so I think there are two things there. I really think we need vehicle standards. Our experience with some of the vendors, in our own experience last year at South by Southwest, and as I've traveled to other cities, there are major safety concerns. The Tool Design Group, who is a national company that consults on bike share, looked at the Seattle and Washington system. They found 15% of the bikes had safety problems that were major. And so those are things that can be fixed. I don't think that that's, the vendors can fix that. They can put countermeasures on the bikes that prevent that. And then the other thing is dealing not only with clutter, but especially as we look at electric bikes and scooters that have lithium batteries, we know these end up in waterways. If you're interested, Google lithium battery in water and see what happens. And I think the way that we can address that is to use the model that Social Bike and Jump have used, which is to require vehicles to actually lock to something. I think that addresses a lot of the street clutter issues. It makes sure that the bikes don't get picked up and put where they shouldn't be. And that similar study looked at how many bikes in Seattle and Washington weren't where they were supposed to be. 30% of them weren't where they were supposed to be, or was where they were parked. And almost 10% were obstructions that were a public danger. And then 20% of the bikes weren't where they said they were on the app. If you lock it to something, you solve a lot of those problems. And in Portland, only one where they Jump under Social Bike operates a system. They only have 1% of their bikes ending up in the wrong places.
I think I agree with most of what's been said. I think performance requirements are another issue that often comes up with how quickly operational staff respond to issues and limiting the time that it takes for a company to respond to those issues. One of the things that comes along with it is education to the general public. If people out there understand that this is a shared system for everyone, no matter who the vendor, they're going to start picking up the bikes for everyone as well. But in the meantime, getting that operational response time down to an acceptable level so that we don't have these messes is another thing I think that hasn't been mentioned but is important going forward with this.
First, I think accessibility as far as actually accessing the bike. I think it's really valuable to be able to get onto the bike without relying on your smartphone. It's the easiest thing for me to deal with this bike because I forget my wallet and I forget my phone all the time. I'm sometimes scatterbrained. So accessibility is one major one for me. Another one is obviously lock to design. It's something we've always done. It's something we really fundamentally believe in. And then my last one would be actually smart service areas. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially as cities that have existent dock-based systems with existent service areas start providing permits to new vendors. Maybe I'm a little biased because we have an e-bike that goes a lot further than a lot of, it goes beyond sort of the one first and last mile solution. It's sort of like a point-to-point solution. But I really think smart service areas is really valuable. My point there is actually that instead of sort of an isolated, like, let's test it out in this underserved area that's never had any bike share or never really had a good bus network or never, like, is sort of like isolated from the downtown core and the job centers. Like, let's try Dockless over there. I find that kind of fundamentally wrong when it's supposed to be a transportation option and it's supposed to help you get to where you're trying to go. And if you sort of isolate these service areas as a sort of pilot area, I think that's kind of messed up. And so it'll be interesting. Like, Chicago just is trying that right now. We'll see how it goes. Theirs is a pilot as well. So it's like this really far south side area. Not to call them out, but I know other cities are also looking at that, and so I'm pretty like strong on this. I think smart service area is really helping people, especially on the outer skirts of cities, get to where they're trying to go. On bikes alone is really valuable.
I have the mic holder. Who wants to catch the microphone?
Thank you. Okay, so this is kind of towards Jump and I guess the city, because you're saying that people have to actually walk up to something. Austin actually has kind of a big deficit in bike parking, and as someone who cycles, you know, anywhere from 20 to 40 miles a week, it's actually kind of, I don't know, the idea of showing up to a place that maybe only has one bike, you know, circular thing that a company's, for-profit company's bike is locked up to, that I can't actually park and go into where I need to go as a local. How do y'all work with cities? Do you install, you know, pay for extra bike parking? How are you going to work with the city to make sure that there is actual bike parking available for both your company's riders and for locals who want to go where they need to and who, you know, have their own bikes?
Absolutely. Like, we definitely want to work with cities to provide bike parking because we know we're sharing space, but it's sort of a city by city case, right? And I know Austin has been building that into their permit fee, actually, thankfully, and has made it easier for vendors like us to answer that question more explicitly, saying, like, well, the permit is designed to pay for more public bike parking. In other cities, like we operate in San Francisco and Washington, D.C. right now, the process has been a little bit more slow to get going. I mean, we have offered like money to install bike racks, but the process is slower because there's a lot of siting concerns for installing bike racks and that sort of thing. And it's just like a different, this isn't to evade your question, it's just that it's a different process, and we have urban planners on staff who would happily do the work to install and permit bike racks, but it is, it's in the permitted world, it's outside the scope often, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but in the old world of RFPs and like B-Cycle, part of the scope of that RFP was installing bike stations in and doing the siting work and all of that. So, sorry, it's complex. But you can probably speak better.
Sure. So from the revenue share perspective, as a city, we have some challenges being a public institution and accepting private money to do public good. So that's one of our issues with being able to accept any kind of give back program that any bike share company may have. Because at the end of the day, not all of them can do that. And one of the things I learned, I'm new to the city, by the way, as of January 22nd, but we don't pick winners and losers. Again, we don't pick winners or losers. That means that I have to be completely fair, open, and transparent about everything. So if I pick one company and decide that that company can help me build bike racks, which I want, I need more of. I need a lot more of them. And I can't wait around for the corridor program to get them all done. A lot of the corridors in the corridor improvement program include a lot of additional, not just bike racks, but I'll call it all active transportation improvements, for lack of a better term. So these are tight, connected, more walkable, bikeable corridors throughout the town. So when that comes around, we'll get that. But again, that's part of the 720 bond program, so we've got some time before all that gets done. In the meantime, we've got to find ways to get these bike racks put into place with the funds that we currently have available. And so through our active transportation program is the current way that we're getting that done. And the interesting thing is, and I wish Laura was here, but she's on vacation. Laura Darrenfield is our manager of active transportation. But Laura's got all those numbers ready in her head about exactly how much bikes and bike trips, dockless or otherwise, have increased in Austin. So we're challenged much in the same way as Austin's growth, right? In that with that growth comes additional active transportation users, and much in the same way of our road network, our bike network is in need of additional investment.
One thing I would say to keep in mind, also wearing another hat, which I used to be on the board of Bike Austin, so part of bike advocacy, the more people riding does drive infrastructure investment. As much as I have some issues with the model, there are positive things that have come out of this. So in China, in many cities, you're seeing a doubling of the people riding bikes. I know I was on a conference call on Friday, and in Dallas, there were discussions about bike lanes where they're at city council that were never there before. So, so additional ridership can drive infrastructure. I mean, as a partner with the city, we look at putting B-Cycle down to enhance bike infrastructure and to provide more ridership. On the flip side, I would say it is a commercialization of public space. The space on the street belongs to the public, and the public should be compensated for the impact. And so the city, I think, I know there are legal issues, but if there's a license agreement or something that allows all of the vendors to contribute to impact in bike parking, bike infrastructure, so that all those things help drive their business model as well.
I would just add the one thing that you identified with the Lock 2 issue is that there's limited bike parking. And I think that there are, it's still an open question whether a Lock 2 model provides a more orderly public space. I think the jump bike is really, I think the jump bike is awesome. I commented on it earlier. It's a cool bike. There's 180 bikes in San Francisco. I don't think we know what a Lock 2 model at scale looks like. But that's an open question that needs to be answered, is how we're going to, I could lock it to next to an ADA ramp, I could lock it outside of a store. I mean, there's still problems that need to be addressed.
I'll just tell you that our current permit is going to allow both to happen because I want to know more about it. I want to know more about the logistics, as Elliot mentioned. I want to understand and have knowledge so that I can iterate to the next level for the next set of permits with this.
This is maybe a pipe dream, but I know that in other cities, I forget what it's called in San Francisco, but the idea of having one card or membership for multiple modes of transportation and not having to have multiple apps, multiple accounts, and so on. Does anyone, I guess specifically from the city, have any thoughts or progress on something like that?
Where is my flying car? Kind of thing. I've been asking for this multimodal, multi-trip, single payment option for a long time. I really believe that we got to iterate out of where we're currently doing it, which is traditional fiat currencies and centralized Christmas tree banking standards. I really believe that the next generation, I'll call it blockchain 4.0, has a lot of extensibility into the transportation market sector from a payment perspective. I really think that we need to get out of this idea that you have to have this credit card that's connected to a bank in order to rent 15 cents of time off that thing or one of these things. That's crazy. There's much better ways to do it. blockchain will give us a lot of the data, the trip generation, everything else that we want. I know I'm talking to a bunch of people that are listening. We're all in the same kiddie pool on this. So I personally believe that we need to kind of stop what some folks are doing in this area, drop back, think about it for a second, and do something that's really meaningful and different.
So I had the opportunity to work pretty closely with Ride Scout when they were developing their app here. We helped get B-Cycle on Ride Scout. And actually before B-Cycle developed its B-Cycle app, there was originally a partnership with Ride Scout to do something similar where you could buy a pass and unlock a bike through their app. And in the conversations, it was actually interesting in many ways. The really big players are who are stopping this. So one would be transit authorities. They've spent a lot of money investing in their own apps, and they don't want to give that up. And then TNCs would be the other one. Uber and Lyft really don't want people on other platforms. And so I think it's going to take maybe on the public side, the transit authority thinking a little bigger, and on the consumer side, just demanding it, rewarding the companies that come together and operate on a single app.
So we've been afforded a really great opportunity. We were recently acquired by Uber, and prior to that acquisition, which actually it was announced, it's not through yet. It's happening, I swear. They're here. Thanks, guys. Prior to that, we have a pilot in San Francisco where we're actually on the Uber app. This is launched back in January, and you can open the Uber app and see what's most convenient for you: a bike, a car, an Uber pool, what have you. So that's one version of, and pay obviously through the Uber app. That's one version of payment integration there. Another that I found out the same day they announced our acquisition a few weeks ago. Uber's also acquiring this company called Masabi, and they are a payment platform that lots of transit authorities use for riders to pay through their phone for. In New York, they pay for like the Long Island Railroad or Metro North. And so that's something in the works. I'm not totally sure what the game plan is there, but if Uber owns us and them and Uber, it might be a pretty interesting integration of transit options.
Close. That's okay. I got a new job. I'm gonna leave the city now and just do this.
All right, thanks. Let's give a warm round of applause for everybody. And thank you to the microphone, the cushion microphone. Grab a beer on your way out. Finish it before you get in your car. Thank y'all.